In Exodus 14, verse 14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Today, take a moment to breathe in the peace that comes with knowing that God is with you every step of the way. In the midst of life's challenges, remember His promises, for He will never leave you nor forsake you. Let His wisdom guide your path and His love light the way. No matter what you're facing today, trust that God is walking beside you, leading you to places you never imagined. His presence is your assurance, and His strength is your foundation. Are you ready to let Him lead you to something greater than you could ever plan on your own? The journey begins with a single step in faith. Will you take it? Here are 7 verses from Proverbs chapter 3 that focus on letting God lead your way. These verses emphasize trusting in God's guidance and following His ways, acknowledging that when we submit to Him, He will lead us in the right direction. Verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Verse 6, in all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Verse 7, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. Verse 8, this will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Verse 9, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the firstfruits of all your crops. Verse 10, then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Verse 11, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke. These verses from Proverbs 3 emphasize the importance of trusting in God's wisdom and submitting to His guidance. By fully relying on God, acknowledging His authority, and avoiding reliance on our own understanding, we open the door to His direction and blessings. When we trust God wholeheartedly and commit our ways to Him, He promises to guide us on the right path, making our journey clear and free from unnecessary obstacles. This process also involves humility, as we are urged not to lean on our own understanding or consider ourselves wise in our own eyes. By honoring God with our resources, embracing His discipline, and choosing His ways over our own, we experience not only spiritual growth, but also tangible blessings in our lives. These actions are the pathway to true peace, health, and prosperity, as we allow God's wisdom to shape our lives, ensuring that we thrive in every aspect. Through this submission, we discover that His ways are always for our good and lead to a fulfilled and abundant life. In addition, these verses emphasize that when we submit ourselves to God's will, we invite His favor and blessing into every area of our lives. By trusting in Him with our whole heart and acknowledging His authority in all things, we align ourselves with His plan, which ultimately leads to a better, more fulfilling life. The passage reminds us that true wisdom comes from God and not from our own intellect or understanding. This means that when we seek to honor Him, not only will we find direction in life, but we will also experience blessings in ways that go beyond our expectations, spiritual, physical, and material. The promise of health, prosperity, and peace comes as a result of surrendering our ways to God and choosing to walk in His truth. In doing so, we avoid the pitfalls of self-reliance and pride, discovering instead the richness that comes from living in obedience to God's plan. Here are 5 key principles from Proverbs 3 that illustrate how we can let God lead our way. The number 1, trust in God's wisdom. In Proverbs 3 verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Trusting in God's wisdom means not relying on your own limited understanding, but surrendering to His perfect guidance. In life, we often encounter situations that leave us feeling unsure or confused. We try to figure things out with our own reasoning, but sometimes our human perspective is clouded or incomplete. This is where God's wisdom becomes invaluable. He sees the big picture, while we can only see what's right in front of us. When we trust in His wisdom, we acknowledge that His perspective far exceeds our own. God's wisdom is not just about knowledge. It's about knowing what is best for us in every moment. His understanding is flawless, and His guidance leads to the paths of peace and fulfillment. When we lean on our own understanding, we are often swayed by our emotions or limited by our experiences. But when we trust in God's wisdom, we allow ourselves to be guided by His perfect plan for our lives. Think of a child following a parent's directions without fully understanding the reasons behind them. They trust that their parent knows best and will lead them safely. Similarly, we are called to trust in God's wisdom, even when we don't fully grasp His reasons. His ways are higher than ours, and He sees what we cannot. Trusting in God's wisdom means surrendering control and having faith that He knows what is best. It involves letting go of the need to have all the answers and trusting that, in His perfect timing, He will reveal His plan. When we lean on Him instead of our own understanding, we find peace and assurance that He is guiding us towards something greater than we could ever imagine. So, when life gets confusing or uncertain, remember, God's wisdom is perfect and His guidance is trustworthy. Trust in Him with all your heart and let go of the need to understand everything on your own. His wisdom will lead you in the right direction. In Proverbs 2 verse 6, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From His mouth comes knowledge and understanding." This verse reminds us that true wisdom comes from God alone. When we trust in Him, we trust in His perfect knowledge and understanding to guide our lives. In James 1 verse 5, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." This verse encourages us to seek wisdom from God. He generously gives wisdom to those who ask, and by trusting in His wisdom, we can be assured that He will guide us through any situation. The number 2, submit to God's guidance. In Proverbs 3 verse 6, "In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Acknowledging God in all areas of your life and submitting to His will ensures that He directs your steps. Life is filled with decisions, both big and small. We often find ourselves standing at crossroads, unsure of which path to take. It's in these moments that God calls us to submit to His guidance. This submission isn't about giving up control, but rather about aligning our hearts and actions with His perfect will. By doing so, we trust that He will lead us in the right direction. When we submit to God, we are acknowledging that He is the ultimate authority in our lives. This means seeking His guidance in everything we do, whether it's our relationships, our work, or our daily choices. We are invited to surrender our own plans and desires, trusting that His plan for us is far greater and more fulfilling than anything we could create on our own. Think of a traveler who follows a guide through unfamiliar terrain. The guide knows the safest and best route to take, and by submitting to their directions, the traveler reaches their destination with confidence. Similarly, when we submit to God's guidance, He directs our paths and leads us to where we are meant to go. Submitting to God doesn't mean life will always be easy, but it does mean that we can trust that He is leading us according to His perfect plan. He promises that when we submit to Him, He will make our paths straight. He will remove obstacles, bring clarity, and give us the strength to overcome challenges along the way. So, as you navigate life's journey, remember to submit to God in all your ways. Trust that when you acknowledge Him, He will guide you with wisdom and grace, and He will lead you on a path that is straight, secure, and full of purpose. In Psalm 37 verse 5, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act." This verse emphasizes that when we submit our plans and trust in God, He will direct our paths and take action on our behalf. Our submission to God leads to His divine intervention in our lives. In Romans 12 verses 1 to 2, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." This passage encourages us to submit ourselves fully to God by renewing our minds. As we do so, God reveals His will to us, guiding us in the path He has for our lives. The number 3, humility and reverence for God. In Proverbs 3 verse 7, "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." Humbling yourself and respecting God's authority, rather than relying on your own wisdom, allows Him to guide you. In a world that often celebrates self-reliance and pride, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking we know best. However, God calls us to humble ourselves before Him and acknowledge that our understanding is limited. True wisdom comes not from relying on our own knowledge, but from recognizing God's supreme wisdom and submitting to His authority. Humility is not about thinking less of ourselves, but about thinking of ourselves less and giving God the rightful place in our lives. When we acknowledge His greatness and reverence His holiness, we open ourselves to His guidance. God does not want us to lean on our own understanding, but to trust in His perfect wisdom and direction. The fear of the Lord mentioned in this verse is not about being afraid of God, but about having a deep, awe-filled respect for His power, authority, and holiness. This reverence leads us to live in alignment with His will, avoiding evil and choosing paths that honor Him. It's a reminder that God's ways are higher than ours, and when we submit to His leadership, we align ourselves with what is truly good and right. Think of a child who looks up to their parents with trust and respect, seeking guidance in all things. Similarly, we are called to trust God in everything, understanding that He knows what is best for us and that His ways lead to life, peace, and joy. By humbling ourselves and acknowledging God's authority, we allow Him to shape our hearts and guide our decisions. When we fear the Lord and turn away from evil, we are aligning ourselves with His perfect plan for our lives. This reverence brings wisdom, peace, and the assurance that we are walking in the path He has set for us. So, let us embrace humility and reverence for God. Trust that by humbling ourselves before Him and submitting to His guidance, He will lead us away from evil and direct us toward His best for our lives. In James 4 verse 10, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will lift you up." This verse teaches that when we humble ourselves before God, He will lift us up. Our humility allows God to work in our lives and lead us in the way He desires. In 1 Peter 5 verse 6, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time." Here, Peter calls us to humble ourselves under God's authority, trusting that in His perfect timing, He will exalt us and guide us toward His purpose. The number 4. Obedience brings blessing. In Proverbs 3 verses 8 to 10, "This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine." Following God's guidance results in both spiritual and material blessings, bringing health and prosperity into your life. God promises that when we live in obedience to Him, honoring His ways and trusting His guidance, blessings will follow. These blessings are not just spiritual, but also extend to the material aspects of our lives. The Scriptures reveal that obeying God can bring physical health, emotional strength, and even prosperity in the form of abundance. When we honor God with our wealth and give Him the first fruits of what we have, we acknowledge that everything we possess comes from Him. By giving back to God with a generous heart, we demonstrate our trust in His provision. This act of faith not only pleases God, but also positions us to receive His blessings in return. The promise of overflowing barns and vats brimming with new wine symbolizes God's abundant provision and the rewards of living in alignment with His will. Think of a gardener who plants seeds in good soil. The more they care for the garden, the more it flourishes, yielding a bountiful harvest. In the same way, when we sow obedience into our lives, we cultivate a heart that is ready to receive God's blessings. Our faithfulness to God in our time, finances, and resources leads to His faithfulness in providing for our needs and even blessing us beyond what we can imagine. Obeying God is not about seeking material gain, but about aligning ourselves with His perfect plan. Yet, God promises that when we live according to His ways, His blessings will overflow into our lives, both spiritually and materially. Health, peace, prosperity, and joy will be the fruit of our obedience. So, as you walk in obedience to God's commands, trust that His blessings will follow. By honoring Him with your resources and your life, you open the door to a future filled with His provision, health, and prosperity. In John 14 verse 15, "If you love me, keep my commands." Jesus teaches that obedience is an expression of our love for Him. When we obey His commands, we align ourselves with His will, and in doing so, we receive His blessings. In Deuteronomy 28 verses 1 to 2, If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. This passage highlights that obedience to God results in his abundant blessings, both in our spiritual and earthly lives. The number 5. Embrace God's discipline. In Proverbs 3 verse 11, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke." Embracing God's correction with a willing heart helps you grow spiritually and stay on the right path. Discipline is often seen in a negative light, especially when it involves correction. However, God's discipline is an expression of his love for us. Just as a loving parent disciplines their child to guide them toward what is best, God corrects us to shape us into the people he created us to be. His discipline is not punitive but restorative, aimed at helping us grow in wisdom and maturity. When we experience God's correction, it can sometimes be uncomfortable, and we may feel as though we are being punished. However, this verse reminds us that God's discipline is an act of love. He desires for us to walk in his ways and to avoid the pitfalls that come with going our own way. His rebuke, though difficult at times, is meant to bring us back to the right path, helping us avoid harm and leading us toward a life of peace and righteousness. Think of a coach who pushes their athlete to their limits. At the moment, the athlete may feel challenged or even frustrated, but the coach's goal is to build their strength and skill. Similarly, when God disciplines us, he is strengthening our faith and helping us become more like Christ. His correction is not meant to hurt us, but to help us grow and live in accordance with his will. Embracing God's discipline requires humility and a willing heart to accept his correction. Instead of resenting or rejecting it, we are called to see it as a sign of God's love and care for us. When we receive his discipline with gratitude, we allow it to shape us into better versions of ourselves and to align more closely with his plan for our lives. So, when you experience God's discipline, remember that it is for your good. Embrace it with a humble heart, knowing that it is an opportunity for growth and a step toward becoming the person God created you to be. Through his correction, you will stay on the right path, growing spiritually and becoming more like him each day. In Hebrews 12 verse 6, "Because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son." This verse reminds us that God's discipline is a sign of his love for us. His correction is meant to shape us, helping us grow in our faith and maturity. In Revelation 3 verse 19, "Those whom I love I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent." Jesus encourages us to embrace his discipline as an act of love. Through his correction, we are called to repent and grow closer to him, becoming more like Christ. In conclusion, embracing God's guidance, as reflected in the verses from Exodus 14 verse 14 and Proverbs 3, leads us to peace, clarity, and abundance. When we trust in him fully, submit to his will, and honor him in all aspects of our lives, he promises to direct our paths and provide blessings beyond our understanding. By relinquishing our own wisdom and relying on his perfect understanding, we open ourselves to spiritual, physical, and material prosperity. As we walk in humility and obedience, we not only experience his favor, but also discover the richness of a life aligned with his purpose. Trusting God's plan, even in times of challenge, brings true peace, health, and a fulfilling life.